You have 30 seconds to tell me why I shouldn't have security throw you out of my building." The words came out colder than I intended, but my heart was pounding. Not with fear or anger or the usual suffocating tightness that came when a woman stood this close to me. No, this was different. This was alive. She didn't flinch. Her eyes, the color of rich, dark coffee, locked onto mine. She held a leather portfolio against her chest like a shield. "Because, Mr. Wolf," she said, her voice a low, smooth melody with an accent that warmed the cold air in the elevator. "In 28 seconds, this elevator will reach your floor. And I'll be serving you with a class action lawsuit that's going to cost you a lot more than a moment of your time." They say life can change in an instant. That karma, or fate, or whatever you want to call it, has a funny way of showing up when you least expect it. I never believed in any of that. I believed in walls. I believed in control. How's everyone doing today? I hope you're somewhere comfortable. My name is Damian Wolf, and this is the story of how I went from being a prisoner in my own skin to a man who could finally breathe, all because of the woman standing in front of me, threatening to destroy everything I'd built. But let me start from the beginning. I was 9 when it first happened. I was hiding at the top of the stairs, peering through the banister. My mother was in the living room with another one of her boyfriends. This one was named Rick. He had a loud laugh that never reached his eyes. He was telling her she was beautiful, that he'd take care of her, the same lines they all used. And she was falling for it, just like always. Her smile was so hopeful, so desperate. I watched him slide his hand to the small of her back, and a hot, prickly feeling crawled up my own arms. My chest got tight. I felt like I couldn't get enough air. I ran to my bathroom and looked in a mirror. Angry red welts were blooming across my neck and chest. Hives. My body was screaming a warning that my mother couldn't hear. That was the beginning of my curse. Rick broke her heart and her bank account 6 months later. The man after him was worse. And the one after that, even worse than him. With every new man, my reaction got more severe. By the time I was in college, just being in a crowded lecture hall with too many women could make my skin itch and my pulse skyrocket. It was a psychosomatic nightmare. My mind had built a fortress to protect me from the pain I saw my mother endure, and my body was the guard of the gate. Any woman who got too close was a threat. So I did what I knew best. I built a different kind of fortress, a billion-dollar tech empire. Wolf Industries. In my world, I made the rules. I could control the environment. My meetings were sterile, my interactions brief. My executive floor was a fortress within a fortress, a place where I was safe. A place where no one could get too close. Until her. Now, standing in a mirrored elevator, I could feel the heat radiating from her. Her skin was a deep, beautiful brown. She smelled faintly of something clean and sweet like limes. I should have been suffocating. My throat should have been closing up. My skin should have been on fire. Instead, every cell in my body was leaning toward her. My heart wasn't racing with panic. It was pounding with a rhythm I'd never felt before. The elevator chimed, and the doors slid open to my private floor. She stepped forward and held out a thick envelope. "Imani Richards," she said, her voice firm. "On behalf of the women of Wolf Industries." I took the papers. Our fingers brushed. A jolt, hot and electric, shot up my arm. Her eyes widened for just a second, and I knew she'd felt it too. She gave a small, sharp nod, then turned and walked back into the elevator without another word. The doors closed, leaving me alone in the silent lobby. I stood there for a full minute, staring at the sealed envelope, a ticking clock with a legal deadline. But I wasn't thinking about the lawsuit. I was thinking about the fact that my skin was calm. My breathing was even. The silence in the lobby was absolute. Then, a faint itch started on the back of my neck. A familiar tightness began to creep into my chest. The old panic started to rise, but it was muted, distant, and I realized the truth. It wasn't her presence that had set off my alarms. It was her absence. The fortress wasn't trying to keep her out. It was screaming because I'd let her go. An uncomfortable silence settled in my office. My head of legal, Arthur Vance, stared at the lawsuit on my desk like it was a venomous snake. He was the only person in the world who knew the full extent of my problem. He'd been with me since the beginning, a friend of my father's who'd become a mentor to me. His gray hair and calm demeanor were usually a steadying force. Not today. A class action, Arthur said, his voice flat. This isn't some disgruntled employee, Damien. This is organized. They have a serious case. I wasn't listening. I was replaying the elevator ride, the scent of limes, the way her fingers felt against mine, the complete and total absence of a usual panic. Her name is Imani Richards, I said, my voice sounding distant even to me. Arthur's eyes narrowed. I know who she is. She's a shark, made a name for herself taking down giants. We can't afford any mistakes. He picked up the file. The allegations are ugly. Systemic gender discrimination. A hostile work environment. They claim your absence has created a culture where women are invisible. He was right. I knew he was right. I hadn't intentionally created it, but my self-imposed isolation had consequences. I built my fortress and left my people to fend for themselves. The men I promoted, the ones I felt comfortable with, had built their own little kingdoms in my shadow. I need to meet with her, I said. Arthur froze. Absolutely not. That's what I'm for. You don't talk to opposing counsel. Ever. Especially not you. The you hung in the air, a heavy reminder of my weakness, my curse. This time is different, I insisted, the words feeling truer than anything I'd said in years. I wasn't affected by her. He studied my face, his expression shifting from legal concern to personal worry. What do you mean, not affected? No itching? No shortness of breath? Nothing, I said, almost a whisper. It was the opposite of nothing, Arthur. I felt calm. He was quiet for a long time. Damien, that's impossible. A psychosomatic response doesn't just pick and choose. She's a woman. That's the trigger. Maybe she's a different kind of woman, I said, realizing how foolish it sounded. But I didn't care. Against his better judgment, Arthur arranged the meeting. But on my terms, not in a sterile boardroom. I wanted neutral ground. I suggested a small, private gallery owned by a foundation I sponsored. It was closed to the public on Mondays. Quiet, minimal staff, controllable. When she walked in, it happened again. The world, which for me was usually a muted gray of anxiety, snapped into sharp focus. She wore a simple dark dress, professional but not severe. She moved with a confidence that I could only ever fake. Mr. Wolf, she said, her tone all business. She didn't offer to shake my hand. Imani. I corrected her, wanted to hear her name on my own lips. Thank you for coming. We walked through the silent gallery. I found myself talking, really talking for the first time in years. I didn't tell her about my mother or the hives, but I told her about the isolation. I told her that I knew my management style had created blind spots. I admitted that I had failed my female employees, not by intention, but by neglect. Neglect is a choice, she said, her voice sharp but not cruel. She stopped in front of a painting, a swirl of chaotic colors. Your company is a reflection of you, Mr. Wolf. If there's a problem in its culture, the problem starts at the top. I know, I admitted, and I want to fix it. I don't want to fight this in court for years. I want to make it right. She turned to face me, and for the first time, I saw something other than a lawyer in her eyes. A flicker of curiosity. And how do you propose to do that? By understanding, I said. Talk to me. Tell me what's really going on. It was a huge risk. I was opening myself up, showing my vulnerability to the one person on earth with the power to ruin me. But I trusted her. I don't know why. It was a feeling in my gut, a quiet hum in my blood that told me she was different. We talked for 2 hours. She laid out the case, not with legal jargon, but with stories. Stories of women who were belittled in meetings, passed over for projects, and told to be less aggressive. It was worse than I imagined. I felt a wave of shame so profound it almost buckled my knees. I didn't know, I said, the words tasting like ash. I swear to you, I didn't know the specifics. You should have, she replied softly. By the end of the meeting, we had the framework of settlement. A real one. Not just money, but a complete overhaul of corporate policies, a new mentorship program, a review board. It would be difficult and expensive, but it was the right thing to do. She promised to take the proposal to her clients. As she was leaving, she paused at the door. Why did you tell me all that? About your isolation? I looked at her, at the woman who had walked into my life and short-circuited 20 years of fear. Because I had a feeling you would understand, I said. She held my gaze for a moment longer, then nodded once and left. I felt a surge of hope, so powerful it was dizzying. I had let someone in, and the walls hadn't crumbled. I had shown a weakness, and it hadn't been used against me. For the first time, I felt like I could actually build a bridge out of my prison. The next morning, I woke up feeling lighter than I had since I was a child. I turned on the news, and my world shattered. There she was, Imani Richards, standing on the courthouse steps, a dozen microphones in her face. The headline on the screen read, "Wolf CEO admits to systemic neglect in bombshell meeting." A reporter was asking her a question. "Ms. Richards, can you confirm that Damian Wolf confessed to you personally that he was aware of the company's toxic culture?" And then I heard her voice, the same smooth, melodic voice that had made me feel calm, that had made me feel human. "I can't speak to the specifics of our confidential settlement discussions," she said, her face a perfect mask of professionalism. "But I can say that we are more confident than ever that the women of Wolf Industries will see justice. Mr. Wolf's leadership has been, by his own admission, completely and utterly absent. We have everything we need to proceed." The blood drained from my face. My skin began to prickle and burn. A familiar fire started crawling up my neck, hotter and more vicious than ever before. She had used my words, my confession, my vulnerability. She had taken the trust one had so stupidly offered her and twisted it into a weapon. Arthur was wrong. She wasn't a shark. She was a monster, and I had invited her in. The itch intensified, spreading across my chest, my arms. I stumbled to the bathroom, gasping for air, and stared at my reflection. Angry, red welter exploding across my skin. The fortress was back. The guards were screaming. And this time, the betrayal felt 1,000 times worse, because for a single foolish day, I had dared to believe I could be free. The phone was buzzing on the marble countertop, a frantic, angry vibration. Arthur. I ignored it. I couldn't hear his voice right now. Couldn't hear the "I told you so" that I knew was waiting for me. All I could hear was the rush of blood in my ears, a roaring sound that almost drowned out the screaming of my own skin. I stared at myself in the bathroom mirror, a stranger looking back. My face was pale, my eyes wide with a familiar, haunted look, but it was the red, angry welts covering my neck and chest that held my attention. They were a map of my own stupidity, each one a testament to the moment I let my guard down, the moment I chose to believe in something other than the four solid walls of my prison. She'd played me perfectly. She had listened with those intelligent, dark eyes, making me feel seen, heard. She had taken my confession, my shame, and turned it into a soundbite for the evening news. Mr. Wolf's leadership has been, by his own admission, completely and utterly absent. The words echoed in my head, a venomous chant. I splashed cold water on my face, the sting doing nothing to cool the fire beneath my skin. I had to see her. It was a terrible idea. It was irrational. It broke every rule Arthur had ever taught me about litigation and self-preservation. I didn't care. This wasn't about the lawsuit anymore. This was about the look in her eyes when she told me she would take my proposal to her clients. I had to know if any of it was real. I grabbed my keys and walked out, leaving Arthur's frantic buzzing behind me. I didn't go to her law firm, the gleaming glass tower downtown that mirrored my own. My gut told me she wouldn't be there. I had my security team, the best in the business, do a quick, quiet search. They found an address for a foundation she sponsored, a small legal aid clinic in a part of the city I usually only saw from 30 floors up. The building was old brick, squeezed between a small grocery store and a laundromat. The sign was simple, Community Justice Project. It felt a world away from the cold, corporate battleground we were supposed to be on. I walked in, and the air was thick with the smell of old paper and fresh coffee. A few people sat in worn-out chairs, waiting patiently. And there she was. She wasn't standing behind a podium. She was sitting at a small, cluttered desk, leaning over to speak quietly with an elderly woman, her expression gentle, focused. She wore a simple blouse, her hair pulled back. She looked different, softer, but no less powerful. She must have felt me standing there, because she looked up. Her eyes met mine across the small room. The gentleness vanished, replaced by a guarded, unreadable expression. She said a few more words to the woman, patted her hand, and then stood up, gesturing for me to follow her into a small, private office at the back. The door clicked shut behind us, and the tiny room felt charged electric. "What are you doing here, Damien?" she asked, her voice low, the accent more pronounced than I remembered. "What am I doing here?" I laughed, but the sound was harsh, broken. "I think the better question is, what the hell did you do? You sat in that gallery. You let me open up a part of myself I haven't shown to anyone, and you turned it into a weapon." I took a step closer. The itching on my neck was a dull, constant burn. Was any of it real? Or were you just looking for a line you could feed to the press? She didn't back down. She stood her ground, her chin tilted up. "Everything I told you was real. And everything you told me was real. The difference is I used it. You used me." I corrected, my voice raw. "I used the truth," she shot back, her eyes flashing. "A truth you yourself admitted to. Did you think this was a game? Did you think you could just offer some money and a few new programs and make it all go away? These are women's lives, their careers. They deserved more than a quiet, tidy settlement that your board could bury in a quarterly report. So you ambushed me? You humiliated me publicly. I protected my clients," she said, her voice dropping, becoming steely and certain. 5 minutes before I went on television, a rival firm filed a motion to have me thrown off this case. They were claiming I was colluding with you. A motion, I found out, that was secretly funded by one of your own board members. Marcus Thorne. The name hit me like a punch to the gut. Thorne, head of acquisitions. Old money, old rules. He'd always resisted my efforts to modernize the company culture, always muttered about how things were better in the old days. "Thorne wants this lawsuit to go away," Imani continued, seeing the understanding dawn on my face. "He wants to crush these women, settle for pennies, and make sure no one ever gets the idea to challenge the status quo again." My press conference wasn't an attack on you, Damien. It was a defensive strike. I made your admission so public that the board can't sweep it under the rug. I forced their hand. I made sure that the settlement we discussed is now the bare minimum they can accept without looking like villains to the entire world. My head was spinning. She had betrayed me to save me, or to save her case. I looked at her, searching for the lie. I saw the news conference again in my mind, the professional mask she wore. I remembered the flicker of something in her eyes in the elevator, the way she listened in the gallery. She had mentioned the board was resistant. I just hadn't listened. I was too focused on the miracle of my own calm skin. "You could have told me," I said, the anger draining away, replaced by a hollow confusion. "You could have warned me. And you would have done what?" she challenged. "Called Arthur? Let your lawyers sanitize everything and kill the deal?" "No, this had to be done. It was the only move I had left to protect these women from your own company." The door creaked open. A young girl, maybe 16, peeked her head in. She had Imani's eyes. "Annie Imani," she asked softly, "Mrs. Gable is asking for you." Imani's entire posture softened. "1 minute, Zora. Tell her I'll be right there." The girl nodded and disappeared, closing the door quietly. Auntie Imani. It wasn't just a case for her. It wasn't just a fee. This was her community, her family. The stakes were so much higher for her than I had ever imagined. The fight wasn't just in a boardroom. It was here, in this small, worn-out office. I looked at the chaos of her desk, the stacks of files for people who couldn't afford a lawyer like her. And I looked at her, the woman who had just publicly eviscerated me, the woman who was fighting a war I didn't even know existed within my own company. The itching on my neck had stopped. My breathing was even. My body, my traitorous, honest body, was telling me something my mind refused to accept. It was telling me to trust her. I had a choice. I could walk out of this office, call Arthur, and unleash every legal weapon I had against her. I could burn it all to the ground and retreat back to my sterile, safe fortress. Or I could take the biggest risk of my life. "Thorne," I said, the name tasting like poison. "He's the problem." "He's the heart of the problem," she confirmed. "The culture you neglected to build? He and men like him filled that vacuum. I met her gaze, and a decision formed, solid and terrifying. An irrevocable commitment. "All right," I said, the word hanging in the air between us. "You want to fix my company? You want to tear down the culture Thorne built? Fine, but you're not going to do it with press conferences anymore. You're going to do it from the inside." Her eyes narrowed. "What are you talking about?" "I'm giving you full access," I said, the idea taking shape as I spoke. "Internal documents, personnel files, interviews with anyone you want. Total transparency. You will lead an independent oversight committee to implement every change we discussed, and more. But you do it with me. You report to me. No more surprises. We cut out the lawyers, we cut out the board, and we fix this together." It was insane. An alliance formed from betrayal. A partnership built on a foundation of pressure and distrust. What was the only path forward? She stared at me, her expression a whirlwind of suspicion and shock. This wasn't a move she had predicted. "Why?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. "Because you were right," I admitted, the words feeling foreign and true. "It's my company. The problem starts at the top, and so does the solution." She held my gaze for a long time, the silence stretching between us. I could feel the pull, the same strange energy that had been there from the first moment in the elevator. It wasn't just attraction. It was something deeper, a recognition. We were two people trapped in different kinds of fortresses, and for the first time, I saw a way out. And it was through her. The first meeting was in a sterile, glass-walled conference room on my floor. It was a space designed for intimidation, but Imani walked in and owned it instantly. She sat down, opened her laptop, and got straight to work, not even giving the panoramic view of the city a passing glance. Arthur sat beside me, his arms crossed, radiating disapproval. He was my lawyer, my protector, and he saw her as the enemy I'd just invited inside the castle walls. "We start with the C-suite," Imani said, her eyes fixed on her screen. "Payroll records, promotion histories, performance reviews. I want everything for the last 5 years." Arthur cleared his throat. "That's highly sensitive proprietary information, Ms. Richards." "That's the point, Mr. Vance," she replied without looking up. "The poison starts at the head." I watched them, a strange spectator at my own corporate autopsy. "Give her what she wants, Arthur," I said. The words felt good. Active. For the first time, I wasn't hiding from the problem. I was facing it, and she was my guide. The days that followed blurred into a grueling routine. We worked out of that conference room, which Imani had turned into her war room. Charts and documents covered the glass walls. We were together for 10, sometimes 12 hours a day. The proximity should have been torture. I was surrounded by the details of the lawsuit, the stories of the women I'd failed, and the constant, overwhelming presence of Imani herself. But my skin remained calm. My breathing stayed even. The fortress inside me was silent, watching her, learning her. I learned the way she bit her lip when she was concentrating. I learned that she hummed, a low, quiet sound, when she found a key piece of data. I learned that she drank her coffee black, and that her fierce lawyer persona softened when she spoke on the phone with her niece, Zora. One night, we were the last two people on the floor. The city lights twinkled below us. We were staring at a spreadsheet that showed a clear pattern. Men with less experience and lower performance scores were being promoted over their female colleagues in Thorne's division. The data was damning. He didn't even try to hide it. I said, a fresh wave of shame washing over me. "Powerful men rarely think they need to," Imani said. She leaned back in her chair, stretching her arms over her head. The movement was simple, unconscious, but it sent a jolt straight through me. I could smell the faint scent of limes that always seemed to cling to her. "Why do you do it?" I asked, the question slipping out before I could stop it. "The clinic, the community work. You could be at any top firm in the country." She dropped her arms and looked at me, really looked at me, for the first time all day. Her gaze was soft, unguarded. "When I was a little girl in Jamaica, my father owned a small farm. A big company came, claimed the water rights, and choked his farm until it died. He had no one to fight for him. I decided then that I would never let someone with power roll over someone without it. Not if I could help it." Her story was so simple, so clear. It hit me how different we were. I had used my power to build walls to protect myself. She had used hers to tear down walls for other people. In that moment, I wanted to be more like her. I wanted to tell her everything about my mother, the hives, the crushing loneliness of my life. I wanted to tell her that just sitting here with her, in this room, felt more real than anything I had experienced in 20 years. I opened my mouth to speak, but my phone buzzed. It was an alert from my head of security. A news story had just broken online. The headline was a gut punch. Inside the Wolf Industries witch hunt, CEO gives girlfriend lawyer unlimited power. The article was vicious. It painted Imani as a manipulative gold digger who had seduced a reclusive, unstable CEO. It quoted anonymous sources from inside the company who feared she was destroying it from the inside. It was Thorne's handwriting all over it. He wasn't just attacking our investigation. He was attacking her character. He was attacking us. I looked at Imani. She was reading the article on her own phone. Her face unreadable, a perfect stone mask. But I could see the slight tremor in her hand. He had made it personal. "I'm sorry," I said, my voice hoarse. "Imani, I am so sorry." She shook her head, her eyes still on the screen. "Don't be sorry. Be angry. This is what they do. When they can't fight the facts, they fight the person." She stood up, her professionalism snapping back into place like armor. "This just proves we're getting close. We need to accelerate. We need the personnel files for Thorne's direct reports. Now." Her strength was incredible. Anyone else would have crumbled. She just sharpened her focus. My admiration for her deepened into something warmer, something dangerous. We worked until 3 in the morning, fueled by coffee and a shared sense of purpose. We were a team. A few days later, we were in a meeting with a group of female engineers, some of the plaintiffs in the lawsuit. They were wary of me, and I couldn't blame them. As they spoke, describing how their ideas were stolen or dismissed, how they were pushed out of important projects, the air in the room started to feel thick. The old tightness began to creep into my chest. My collar felt too tight. I felt their pain, their frustration, and my body was translating it into its old, familiar language of panic. An itch started on the back of my neck. I subtly tried to scratch it, but it only made it worse. My heart rate started to climb. I could feel the sweat on my palms. I was losing control. I was about to have a full-blown attack in front of the very people I was trying to help, proving every rumor about my instability true. Just as the panic was about to swallow me whole, I felt a gentle pressure on my foot. I looked down. Imani had moved her chair slightly and placed her shoe against mine. It was a tiny, almost unnoticeable point of contact, but it was enough. It was an anchor in the storm. I focused on that single point of pressure, on her presence beside me. I took a slow breath, then another. The roaring in my ears subsided. The itching faded to a dull hum. The tightness in my chest eased. She didn't look at me. She just kept guiding the conversation, her voice calm and steady. But she knew. She had seen my panic and, without a word, had pulled me back from the edge. My dependence on her was terrifying. It was a weakness. Thorne was right about one thing. She had unlimited power over me, but she wasn't using it to destroy me. She was using it to hold me together. We found our proof late one Thursday night. It was buried in an expense report. Thorne had been using a corporate slush fund to pay off a third-party contractor. The same contractor we discovered who was behind a series of anonymous online attacks against female tech journalists who had been critical of our company culture. He wasn't just fostering a bad culture. He was actively exporting it. It was the smoking gun. Enough to take to the board, enough to force him out. We had won. I felt a surge of triumph, of relief. I looked at Imani, and she was smiling, a genuine, brilliant smile that lit up her whole face. "We did it," I said, my voice filled with an emotion I couldn't name. "We're not done yet," she said, but her smile remained. Impulsively, I reached across the table and put my hand over hers. Her skin was warm. That same electric jolt from the elevator shot up my arm, but this time it was familiar, welcome. Her smile softened. Her eyes searched mine. The space between us shrank. The whole world seemed to fade away until it was just the two of us, the city lights a blur behind her. This was it, the moment where everything could change. The door to the conference room slid open. Arthur stood there, his face grim. He was holding a thin file. "Damien," he said, his voice tight. "I need to speak with you. Alone." The moment shattered. I pulled my hand back as if I'd been burned. Imani's expression shuddered, the lawyer back in control. I followed Arthur into my office, my heart pounding with a new kind of dread. "I told you this was a mistake," Arthur said, his voice low and urgent. He tossed the file onto my desk. I didn't trust her. I had her looked into. Quietly. "Arthur, what did you do?" "I did my job. I protected you." He opened the file. Inside were bank statements. They showed a series of wire transfers, 6 figures each, from an offshore account into a holding company. The offshore account, Arthur said, his finger tapping the paper, is controlled by Marcus Thorne. The holding company is registered to Imani Richards' sister. The air left my lungs. "It couldn't be. It's a payoff, Damien," Arthur said, his voice filled with a sad certainty. "Thorne is paying her to orchestrate this whole thing. She plays the hero, gets you to fire him with a golden parachute, and the lawsuit gets settled quietly for a fraction of what it's worth. She takes out a competitor for him and gets rich doing it. She's been playing you from the beginning." My mind raced, trying to make sense of it. The public ambush on the news, was it really to force my hand? Or was it to make her look tough while she was already planning to sell out her clients? Her father's farm, was it a true story, or a perfectly crafted tale to win my sympathy? The touch of her foot under the table, was it a gesture of support, or a calculated move to keep her new asset from breaking down? I walked to the glass wall of my office. I could see her in the conference room, packing her briefcase, her back to me. All the progress, all the trust, all the hope. It was all turning to ash in my mouth. My skin began to prickle. A faint, familiar itch started on my neck. The fortress was sounding the alarm. The enemy wasn't outside the walls anymore. I had led her straight into the throne room. Arthur placed a hand on my shoulder. "We can fix this. We go to the board. We expose them both. We end this now." I looked at Imani's reflection in the glass. The woman who made me feel human. The woman who held the power to either free me or destroy me completely. And in that moment, staring at the damning evidence in the file, I had no idea which one it was. The betrayal felt sharper, more absolute than anything I'd ever felt before, because this time, I hadn't just let her pass the guards. I had given her the key. My blood went cold. The file felt impossibly heavy in my hand, a block of ice freezing me from the inside out. I looked at Arthur, my oldest friend, my protector, and then at her reflection in the glass. She was putting her laptop into her bag, a small, satisfied smile still on her lips. A smile from our victory. A smile that was now a lie. Every instinct screamed. My skin was on fire. The welts were rising on my chest, a physical warning of the poison I'd just ingested. But under the pain, under the panic, something else fought for air. The memory of her foot against mine. The look in her eyes when she told me about her father. It couldn't all be a performance. It just couldn't. "Damien," Arthur's voice was gentle, pulling me back from the edge. "We need to call security. We need to handle this." I shook my head, my eyes still locked on her reflection. "No," I said, my voice a rasp. "I will." I turned and walked out of my office, back toward the conference room. I moved like a man walking to his own execution. The weight of 20 years of isolation, of fear, of loneliness settled back onto my shoulders. I had been a fool to think I could ever be free of it. I stepped into the doorway. She looked up, her smile fading as she saw my face. She saw the file in my hand. Her body went still. The air crackled, the brief warmth of our shared victory vanishing into a bitter chill. "What is it?" she asked, her voice cautious. I didn't say anything. I walked to the table and slid the file across the polished surface. It stopped right in front of her. She looked down at it, then back up at me, a question in her eyes. "Open it," I said. My voice was flat, dead. She hesitated, then opened the cover. Her eyes scanned the bank statements. I watched her, searching for the flicker of guilt, the telltale sign of a liar caught in the act. I saw nothing. Her expression didn't change. It was a perfect, unreadable mask. She closed the file softly. "So you know," she said. It wasn't a question. "Explain it," I demanded, the words tearing out of my throat. Explain how Marcus Thorne's money ends up in your sister's account. Explain how this isn't the biggest setup I've ever walked into. For the first time since I met her, I saw her composure crack. Not with guilt, but with a flash of pure, hot anger. You think this is a setup? You think I'm working with him? The evidence seems pretty clear. I shot back, gesturing at the file. The itch on my neck was maddening. Evidence. She laughed, a sharp, humorless sound that echoed in the silent room. You call this evidence? This is a leash, Damien, not a partnership. Esther de Hair, confused. My sister, Zora's mother, she's sick, Imani said, her voice dropping, losing its anger and gaining a heavy, weary weight. She has a degenerative disease. The treatments cost more money than my family has ever seen. Thorne found out. He has people everywhere. He didn't offer me a bribe. He offered my sister a death sentence. My blood ran even colder. He offered to cover her medical costs. Imani continued, her eyes locked on mine, daring me to look away. Anonymously, through a foundation. But there was a condition. I had to bury this lawsuit. Settle for nothing. Let him win. When I refused, he threatened to pull the funding and leak a doctored version of these papers. A version that made it look exactly like what you think it is. A payoff. I felt the floor drop out from under me. This was worse. 1,000 times worse than a simple betrayal. She wasn't a shark. She wasn't a monster. She was a woman in an impossible situation, fighting a war on two fronts. One for her clients and one for her family. And Thorne had used her love for her sister to forge a weapon against her. And I had just pointed that weapon right at her heart. Why didn't you tell me? I whispered, the shame so thick I could barely speak. That was the wrong thing to say. The anger came roaring back into her eyes, hotter than before. Tell you, she spat. Why? So you could what? Write a check and fix it? So I could be indebted to another powerful man? I told you why I do this work, Damien. I don't let bullies win. I handle my own fights. She picked up her briefcase, her movements sharp, final. I thought you were different. I really did. I thought you saw me. But you looked at that file, and in 5 seconds, you decided I was just another woman who could be bought. You didn't even hesitate. Imani, wait, I pleaded, taking a step toward her. No, she said, holding up a hand. Her voice was shaking now, not with anger, but with a deep, profound hurt that cut me deeper than any insult. I can't do this anymore. I can't work with you. I can't trust you to have my back, because when the pressure is on, you will always retreat to your fortress. You will always choose to believe the worst. She walked to the door, her back straight, her pride her only shield. The deal is off, she said, not looking back. The oversight committee is dissolved. We're done here. I'll see you and your lawyers in court, Mr. Wolf. The door slid shut, leaving me in a silence that was louder than a scream. Mr. Wolf. She had thrown my name back at me like a wall, rebuilding the one I had just started to tear down. I stood there for a long time, the damning file still open on the table. Arthur came in, his face etched with concern. I heard shouting. Is it done? Is she gone? I turned to look at him, my oldest friend. My vision was blurry. She wasn't working with him, Arthur. He was blackmailing her. Her sister is sick. He used it against her. Arthur's face fell. He looked from me to the file, the pieces clicking into place. Damien, I was just trying to protect you. The evidence. He played you. I said, my voice hollow. He knew you'd dig. He knew you'd find it. He knew you'd show me. He used my trust in you to destroy my trust in her. And it worked perfectly. I'm sorry, Arthur said, his own voice cracking. I never imagined. Leave me alone, I said. The words were quiet, but they had the force of a command. He hesitated, then nodded and backed out of the room, closing the door behind him. I was completely alone. I had lost her. I had pushed away the only person who had ever seen past my walls, the only person whose presence didn't trigger my curse. And in doing so, I had proven her right. I was a coward who ran back to his prison at the first sign of a threat. The itching started again, no longer a prickle, but a furious, all-consuming burn. It clawed its way up my neck, across my chest, down my arms. I stumbled back into my office, gasping for breath, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. I ripped at my collar, desperate for air. I collapsed into my chair, staring out at the billion-dollar view I had built to keep the world at bay. The city lights were a cold, distant blur. The fortress was back. The guards were screaming. The walls were higher, thicker, and more impenetrable than ever before. But it was worse now. So much worse. Because for a few short weeks, she had shown me the sun. And now, the darkness was absolute. The silence in my office was a physical thing, a heavy blanket that suffocated me. The hives were no longer just an itch. They were a raging fire under my skin. I clawed at my neck, my arms, but it was like trying to put out a forest fire with a teacup. Every breath was a ragged, shallow gasp. My body was in full rebellion, punishing me for my stupidity, for the brief, insane hope that I could be something other than this broken, cursed man. My phone buzzed endlessly on the desk. Arthur, the board, the PR team. I swept it off the desk with a roar of frustration, sending it skittering across the floor where it fell silent. I didn't want to talk to anyone. I didn't want their pity, their apologies, their plans. They couldn't fix this. No one could. She was gone, and she had taken the quiet, the calm, the very air from my lungs with her. For 3 days, I didn't leave my penthouse. The fortress of Wolf Industries had been breached, so I retreated to my last line of defense, my home, but offered no comfort. Every quiet corner reminded me of her. The view of the city now looked like the one from the conference room, where we had worked so closely. The smell of coffee brewing in the morning reminded me of the endless cups we'd shared. My own skin was a constant, burning reminder of her absence. On the 4th day, Arthur showed up at my door. He must have used his old master key, because I didn't let him in. I found him standing in my living room, his face a mask of worry and exhaustion. "You can't keep doing this, Damien," he said, his voice soft. "He's making his move. Let him," I croaked. My throat felt like sandpaper. "Let him take it." "I don't care." "You don't mean that," Arthur insisted, stepping closer. "This company is your life." "No," I said, turning away from him to face the window. It was my cage, a very expensive cage. "He's called an emergency board meeting for tomorrow," Arthur pressed on, ignoring my despair. "He's citing the instability clause in the corporate bylaws, the one we put in to protect the company from a hostile takeover. He's using it against you. He's painting a picture of a mentally unstable CEO who fell for a corporate spy and nearly drove the company into the ground. He's got the press leaks, your refusal to meet with the board, your history. He's going to claim you're unfit to lead." I laughed, a harsh, ugly sound. "He's not wrong, is he?" I looked down at my arms, at the angry red welts that covered my skin. "Look at me, Arthur. I'm a mess. I can't even stand in a room with my own board without falling apart." "Then let me fight for you," he begged. "Give me your proxy. I can go in there and..." "And what?" I cut him off. "Tell them it's all a misunderstanding? That their CEO is allergic to half the population? Thorne will tear you apart. He'll tear me apart. He'll win." Every option was a dead end. If I didn't show up, I proved Thorne's point. I was a coward, a recluse, unfit to lead. If I did show up, I would have a catastrophic public breakdown. I would prove his point in a much more spectacular, humiliating fashion. He had me trapped. He had built the perfect cage, and I had walked right into it. "Damien, please," Arthur said, his voice cracking. "Don't let him take what you built. Don't let him win because of what he did to her." Her name hung in the air between us. The mention of her was a physical blow. The memory of the hurt in her eyes was a fresh wave of agony. She had faced down a blackmailer to protect her family and her clients. She had fought. And what was I doing? Hiding, wallowing in my own self-pity. "Okay," I whispered, the word tasting like glass. "I'll go." The walk from the elevator to the boardroom the next morning was the longest walk of my life. Every step was a battle. The air was thick with perfume, with voices, with the simple presence of other people. My skin began to prickle before I even reached the door. My heart was a frantic drum against my ribs. I felt Arthur's hand on my back, a small gesture of support, but it did nothing. He wasn't the anchor I needed. I pushed the door open and walked in. The long table was full. 12 board members. 5 of them were women. My eyes slid over them, and a fresh wave of heat washed over me. Thorne was at the far end of the table, looking cool and confident in his expensive suit. He gave me a small, pitying smile. It was the smile of a predator who knew its prey was already dead. I took my seat at the head of the table. My hand was shaking, so I clasped him in my lap. The itching started on my collar line, a familiar, terrible warning. Thorne began to speak. His voice was calm, reasonable. He spoke of his deep respect for me, for the company I had built. He spoke of his grave concerns for my recent erratic behavior. He laid out his narrative piece by piece. My inexplicable decision to grant an unknown, hostile lawyer total access to the company. The disastrous press conference. The damaging leaks. My complete withdrawal from my duties over the past week. Damien has been under enormous stress, Thorne said, his voice dripping with false concern as he looked directly at me. And it appears his old anxieties have returned. The company needs a steady hand on the wheel, not for my sake, but for the sake of our employees and our shareholders. He presented a folder to each board member. This contains sworn affidavits from employees who have witnessed Mr. Wolf's distress, as well as a physician's report from several years ago outlining the severity of his condition. My blood turned to ice. He had my old medical files, the ones I thought were sealed forever. He had everything. I am therefore invoking Section 7B of the corporate bylaws, Thorne announced, his voice ringing with triumph. I'm calling for a vote of no confidence in the immediate removal of Damien Wolf as CEO on grounds of medical incapacitation. All eyes turned to me. This was it, my one chance to speak, to fight back, to tell them about Imani, about the blackmail, about Thorne's corruption. I opened my mouth, but the words wouldn't come out. My throat was closing. The air in the room felt like water, heavy and thick. I was drowning. The itching exploded across my chest and neck. I could feel the welts rising, hot and angry. I clawed at my collar, a strangled gasp escaping my lips. The faces around the table blurred, their expressions shifting from concern to alarm to pity. I saw Thorne's smug, satisfied smile. It was over. I had lost. I had not only failed to defend myself, I had become the living proof of his every accusation. The vote was quick, unanimous. I don't remember leaving the room. I remember the feeling of hands on my arms, security guards, my own men, escorting me out. I remember the averted eyes of my employees as I was led through the lobby. I walked out of the glass doors of the building that bore my name for the last time. The city air hit me, cold and indifferent. I was out. I was stripped of my company, my title, my life's work. The fortress I had built to protect myself had just thrown me into the street. I ended up in a hotel, a sterile, anonymous room. I couldn't go back to my penthouse, the place that was supposed to be my home, but was now just another monument to my failure. For a week, I didn't exist. I ordered room service and left the trays outside the door. I didn't answer my phone. I watched the news. Marcus Thorne was the new interim CEO of Wolf Industries. He gave a press conference, promising a return to stability. He announced that the company had reached a fair and equitable settlement with the plaintiffs in the discrimination suit. He had paid them off, buried it, just like he wanted. He had won. He had taken everything. One afternoon, I was staring out the hotel window when I saw her. It wasn't really her, just a woman on the street with the same proud way of walking. But my heart seized in my chest, and for the first time in weeks, the itching on my skin stopped. It was just for a second, a fleeting moment of peace brought on by a ghost. And then the despair hit me, a wave so powerful it buckled my knees. I fell to the floor, my face pressed against the cold carpet. I had lost my company. I had lost my pride. But that wasn't the rock bottom. The true devastation, the thing that hollowed me out completely, was the knowledge that I had lost her. I had let a monster like Thorne convince me that she was the enemy. I had stood on the edge of salvation, and I had chosen to throw myself back into the dark, and I had dragged her down with me. A knock on the door dragged me out of the numb silence. I didn't answer. The lock clicked a moment later. It was Arthur. Of course, it was Arthur. He walked in and saw me on the floor, not a captain of industry, Not a billionaire, just a man in a wrinkled shirt who hadn't seen the sun in a week. He didn't say, "I told you so." He didn't say, "I'm sorry." He just walked over, his face grim, and dropped a thick binder on the coffee table. The thud was the loudest sound I'd heard in days. "I was wrong," he said, his voice raw with a sleepless anger I hadn't heard from him before. I looked at the facts in front of me, and I missed the entire story. I'll let him play me, Damien. I'll let him play us both. I didn't move. I didn't care. "It's over, Arthur." He won. "No," Arthur said, his voice like flint. "It's not over." I didn't stop digging. Thorne made one mistake. He assumed that once you were gone, I would just quietly retire. He underestimated how much I blame myself for this. He opened the binder. It was full of documents, highlighted and marked with notes. "Her sister," he said, tapping a page. "Imani's sister." I looked into her medical care. The foundation that Thorne was using to pay her bills, the one he was holding over her head, it's a shell, one of his shells. But the money funding it wasn't his. It was Wolf Industries' money. He was blackmailing her with our own funds. I pushed myself up into a sitting position, my body aching. A small flicker of something, not hope, but interest, sparked in the dead part of my soul. "It gets worse," Arthur continued, flipping through the pages. "Your old medical records. The ones he presented to the board. I got a copy. I also got a copy of the original diagnosis from your doctor's private files. They're different. Thorne's version is exaggerated, with key phrases added. Prone to paranoid delusions. Incapable of sound judgment under stress. You paid your old doctor a fortune years ago to create a second, falsified version of your file. He's been building this weapon against you for a very long time, just waiting for the right moment to use it." I stared at the two documents side by side. My curse was real, but Thorne had twisted it, magnified it, and turned it into a legal justification to have me declared unfit. He hadn't just seized an opportunity. He had orchestrated the entire downfall. He wanted the company, I said, the pieces clicking together with a horrifying clarity. This was never just about the lawsuit. "He doesn't just want the company, Damien," Arthur said, his eyes burning with intensity. "He wants to own it, outright. For the past 2 years, he's been using a network of shell corporations, the same ones from the slush fund Imani found, to systematically undervalue our stock. He's been creating small, manufactured crises, driving the price down bit by bit, all while buying up shares through proxies. The lawsuit was his endgame. Your public removal was meant to be the final blow, the thing that sends a stock price into a death spiral. Then he and his partners initiate a hostile takeover for pennies on the dollar." I stood up, my legs unsteady. The rage was a slow, cold tide rising inside me, pushing out the despair. He wasn't just a corporate rival. He was a thief. He was trying to steal my legacy, my father's legacy, everything I had poured my entire life into. He was gutting it from the inside, and he had used my deepest wound and Imani's greatest vulnerability as his tools. I walked to the window and looked down at the city. It wasn't my city anymore. It belonged to him. The rage solidified into something hard and clear in my chest. Purpose. Imani's words echoed in my head. I don't let bullies win. She had fought him. Even when he held her family's life in his hands, she had refused to back down. She had stood her ground. And me? I had crumbled. I had let him break me. I had run back to my cage and pulled the door shut, proving her right about everything she believed I was. A man who would always retreat to his fortress. Well, the fortress was gone now. Thorne had demolished it. I had nothing left to hide behind. And in a strange, terrifying way, it was liberating. For the first time in my life, I had nothing left to lose. I turned back to Arthur. He thinks I'm broken, I said, the words feeling new in my mouth. He thinks I'm a recluse who can't function without his title. He's counting on me staying in this room until I fade away. What are you going to do? Arthur asked, the flicker of the old hope in his eyes. The choice was simple. It was the only choice there ever was. I could stay here, the victim in Thorne's story, the crazy billionaire who lost his mind. Or I could step out into the light, hives and all, and burn his whole story to the ground. I had to stand in my truth, all of it. The curse, the fear, the shame. It was the only way. I'm going to rewrite the ending, I said. The first step was the hardest. It was a leap of faith into a fire I wasn't sure I could survive. But I had to take it. There was only one person who knew how to fight Thorn. Only one person who was smart enough and tough enough to go up against him. Only one person I trusted to see the truth. And I had to earn back her trust, even if it was the last thing I ever did. "Give me my phone," I said to Arthur, my voice steady for the first time in weeks. "Find a number for Imani Richards. Not her office. I need her personal number. And find out where her sister is being treated. I'm not going to be another powerful man writing a check. I'm going to be the man who shows up." I held the phone in a hand that wouldn't stop shaking. Her number, acquired by Arthur's quiet, efficient team, felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds. Making this call was harder than walking into that boardroom. Harder than anything I'd ever done. Because this wasn't about business. This was about my soul. It rang 3 times. I was about to hang up, to give in to the cowardice that felt so familiar when she answered. "Hello." Her voice was tired, devoid of the fire I knew. It was the voice of someone who had lost a battle. "Imani, it's Damien." Silence. For a long, painful moment, I thought she'd hung up. Then, I heard her take a sharp breath. "What do you want?" To apologize, I said, the words clumsy, inadequate. "To tell you I was a fool. A blind, stupid fool. I know what Thorn did. I know about the blackmail. I know about your sister." The silence on the other end of the line was different now. It was attentive, waiting. "He used me to hurt you." I continued, my own voice thick with shame. "He knew I was weak. He knew I'd run and hide. And I did exactly what he wanted. I am sorry. I am so sorry, Imani." "An apology doesn't fix anything, Damien," she said, her voice still low, but with a flicker of the old steel. "He won. It's done." "No," I said, a new strength hardening my own voice. "It's not done. Arthur found everything. The embezzlement, the stock manipulation, the original medical files he faked. We have him. But I can't do this without you. I won't do this without you." She was quiet for a moment. "Why should I trust you? You broke." "I did." I admitted the truth sharp and clean. "I broke completely. But they can't break me anymore. He already took everything. There's nothing left to be afraid of." I took a breath. "I'm not calling to offer you a check for your sister. I'm not calling to ask you to be my lawyer. I'm asking you to be my partner. Let's go in there and burn him to the ground together." I told her the date of the annual shareholders meeting. It was in 2 days. It was our only shot. "Meet me tomorrow," I said. "There's a small coffee shop near St. Jude's Hospital. 10 a.m. I'll show you everything." I didn't have to explain why I chose that location. She knew. It was where her sister was. It was me showing up. Not as a billionaire, not as a client, but as a man. The next morning, I walked into the coffee shop, and the familiar tightness started in my chest. The room was crowded, full of people, full of women. The itch started on my neck. I took a deep breath and focused on the reason I was there. Her. She was sitting in a booth in the back, a cup of tea untouched in front of her. She looked exhausted. The fight had taken a toll on her. When she saw me, her eyes were wary, guarded. I sat down and pushed the binder Arthur had prepared across the table. "This is everything," I said. "Read it." For the next hour, she read. She didn't speak. She just turned the pages, her expression shifting from weariness to shock, then to a slow-burning, righteous fury. She saw the falsified medical records, the intricate web of shell companies, the proof that Thorn had been systematically destroying the company's value to buy it for himself. She saw the proof that he had been using company money, my money, to threaten her sister's life. When she finished, she closed the binder and finally looked at me. The weariness in her eyes was gone, replaced by the fire I remembered from the elevator. The fire I had missed more than I could ever say. "What's the plan?" she asked. The day of the shareholders' meeting, I stood outside the grand ballroom of the hotel where it was being held. I could hear the murmur of the crowd inside. My heart was pounding. My palms were sweating. The old panic was a beast clawing at the inside of my chest. I felt a hand slip into mine. "Imani, you don't have to do this alone," she said softly. Her hand was warm, firm, an anchor. I looked at her. She was wearing a sharp, professional suit, looking every bit the warrior she was. We weren't a couple. We weren't even friends. Not yet. We were soldiers about to walk into the fight of our lives. "He thinks you're my weakness," I said, squeezing her hand. "He has no idea you're my only strength." We walked in together. We didn't use the main entrance. As the largest single shareholder, I had the right to be there, and we used a side door that led directly to the front of the room. Thorne was on the stage, basking in the spotlight. He was in the middle of a self-congratulatory speech about restoring stability and his bold new vision for the future. He was smiling, confident, the king on his throne. Then he saw us. His smile froze. His face went pale. The color drained from his skin as he saw me, the ghost he thought he'd banished, walking toward the stage. And beside me, the woman he thought he'd broken. The shock on his face was a small, satisfying victory before the main event even began. A murmur went through the crowd. Phones came up, recording. The board members, sitting in the front row, stared in stunned silence. Thorne's recovery was quick. "Damien," he said into the microphone, his voice a smooth performance of concern. "It's good to see you out of your hotel, but this is a private meeting." "I'm a shareholder, Marcus," I said, my voice quiet but carrying in the suddenly silent room. "I believe I have a right to be here. I believe I have a right to speak." I walked up the steps to the stage and took the microphone from the lectern. I looked out at the sea of faces, shareholders, press, the people who owned the company I had built. The itching on my neck was a torment. My pulse was a frantic trip hammer. But I met their eyes. Marcus Thorne was right about one thing. I began, my voice shaking slightly. He was right when he told the board that I have a condition, a problem. I took a deep breath, the truth a terrifying weight I was about to release. For most of my life, I have suffered from a severe psychosomatic disorder, an extreme stress response. It started when I was a child, watching my mother suffer. My mind, in a misguided attempt to protect me, built a fortress. My body became the guard, and the trigger was women. A gasp rippled through the audience. I didn't look at Thorne. I looked at the crowd. It manifests as hives, shortness of breath, a panic so severe it can be debilitating. It's the reason for my isolation. It's the reason I failed to see the toxic culture growing in my own company. It is my deepest shame and my greatest weakness. And Marcus Thorne knew all about it. I turned to look at him now. The shock on his face had been replaced by fury. He was losing control. He used my illness against me. He acquired my private medical files and had them altered, adding words like paranoid delusions and unfit for command to paint me as a madman. He presented those lies to the board, and they believed him. I held up the binder. This contains the original medical report, and the falsified one he created. It's all in here. Arthur, sitting in the front row, stood up with a team of assistants. They began handing copies of the binder to every board member and every major press outlet in the room. But he didn't stop there. I continued, my voice growing stronger, fueled by the truth. His real goal wasn't just to remove me. It was to steal my company. For 2 years, he has been using a network of shell corporations to illegally drive down our stock price. Also, he could trigger a hostile takeover and buy the company for nothing. The room erupted in shouts. The board members were flipping through the binder, their faces pale with horror and the dawning realization of their own gullibility. And to achieve his goal, I said, my voice ringing with rage, he needed one last crisis, one last scandal to send the stock into a nosedive. He found it in a class action lawsuit filed by the brave women of this company, women who were ignored for too long. I turned and looked at Imani, who was standing at the foot of the stage, watching me, her expression unreadable. And he found it in their lawyer, Imani Richards, a brilliant, tenacious woman who refused to back down. I looked back at the crowd. So he tried to break her. He discovered her sister was desperately ill, and he used my company's money, your money, to secretly pay her medical bills, holding her sister's life over her head as blackmail. He threatened to pull the funding unless Ms. Richards agreed to bury the lawsuit and betray her clients. I pointed at Thorne. This man didn't just try to steal a company. He tried to destroy a good woman's family to do it. He didn't just lie about my health. He weaponized a sick woman's life for his own greed. Thorne grabbed the other microphone. This is slander. Lies from a disgraced, mentally ill man and his manipulative girlfriend. Is it Imani's voice cut through the chaos. She was walking up the stage, calm and powerful. She held up her phone, connected to the ballroom sound system. A recording began to play. It was Thorne's voice, cold and clear. Asterisk, the arrangement is simple, Ms. Richards. You make this lawsuit disappear. Quietly. In return, the anonymous donations for your sister's care continue. You try to fight me, and I'll not only pull the funding, I'll leak documents that make it look like you were on my payroll all along. Who do you think they'll believe? Asterisk. The recording ended. The silence in the room was absolute. Thorne stared at Imani, his face a mask of pure hatred. He was exposed, utterly and completely. I stepped forward, taking the microphone one last time. I looked at the board members who had cast me out. You voted to remove me based on the lies of a thief and a blackmailer. Today, I'm calling for a new vote. A vote to remove Marcus Thorne and every board member who enabled him. I looked out at the faces in the crowd, and I felt a strange calm settle over me. The itching was gone. My heart was steady. My breath was deep and even. I was standing in front of hundreds of people, laying my deepest shame bare, and I had never felt stronger. And I am asking you, the shareholders, to support my new vision for Wolf Industries. A company built on transparency and integrity. A company with a new, independent board. A company where a permanent, fully funded oversight committee, led by Imani Richards, will ensure that no woman's voice is ever silenced here again. Security was moving toward the stage. Thorne looked from me to Imani and then to the security guards. The fight was gone. He was just a small, defeated man. They took his arms and led him away, a chorus of camera shutters following his every step. I stood on that stage, under the bright lights, and for the first time in my life, I wasn't hiding. I was free. I looked at Imani. She was looking at me, and in her eyes, I saw not a lawyer, not a partner, but the woman who had walked into my prison and showed me the key was in my own hand the entire time. She gave me a small, slow nod, and in that moment, I knew we hadn't just won the company back. We had just begun to build its future. And ours. The user has requested an output of 0 words for this act. Adhering to this critical instruction results in an empty response.